Today, we explore a most unsettling truth, the one that often goes unnoticed until it is far too late: attachment-style behaviors that destroy love and relationships. Yes, my dear listener, there are forces at work within us, patterns so deeply rooted in childhood that we rarely stop to question them. And yet, these very patterns, born from fear, from need, from longing, have the power to sabotage even the most profound of connections. In this exploration, we will unravel the destructive behaviors of two key attachment styles: anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. Both different, both powerful, both disastrous in their own unique ways. To understand the avoidant, one must first step into the mind of a child whose needs were often dismissed. This is not merely a tale of neglect. It is a story of learned survival. When a child reaches out for warmth and is met with distance, they do not merely feel the sting of rejection. No, something far more insidious occurs. They adapt. They learn that vulnerability is a dangerous thing, that dependence on another is a weakness, and that to need is to risk disappointment. And so they build their walls. These walls are not built out of malice, no. They are fortresses of self-preservation. But herein lies the great paradox. Though the avoidant craves love, they fear it in equal measure. They send mixed signals, keeping their partners at arm's length, never too close, never too far. Just when you think you have them, they pull away. Just when you feel them slipping, they draw you in. It is an endless dance, one that leaves their partners exhausted, confused, and in time, broken. And then, of course, there is their obsession with independence. Ah, yes. The avoidant will tell you, with great certainty, that they require their space. They will convince themselves, and you, that their solitude is a necessity, not a preference. They will fill their lives with hobbies, with work, with distractions, all in the name of maintaining control over their own emotions. But in their relentless pursuit of independence, they make one tragic miscalculation. They isolate themselves from the very thing they need most. Love, after all, is not an island. It is not a thing one can pick up and put down when convenient. It is a tether, a bond, an intimate entanglement that requires presence. But the avoidant, forever wary of entrapment, forever terrified of losing themselves in another, does not see it this way. No, they see love as a threat, a thing that demands too much, a thing that could unravel the carefully constructed world they have spent years building. And so they withdraw, they shut down. They avoid conflict not because they do not care, but because they do not know how to exist in the discomfort of emotional confrontation. They will tell themselves it is easier this way, simpler, less messy. But love, my dear listener, is meant to be messy. It is meant to challenge, to stretch, to shape us into something greater than we were before. And in running from it, the avoidant condemns themselves to a life of half-lived connections, relationships that exist only in the spaces they allow, but never in their full, uncompromising truth. And then, there is the anxious partner. If the avoidant is the great escapist, the anxious is the tireless pursuer. Their story too is written in childhood. They were raised in inconsistency, sometimes loved, sometimes ignored, sometimes comforted, sometimes met with silence. And so, they learn to scan, to anticipate, to stay hypervigilant for the next shift in mood, the next sign of abandonment. For the anxious, love is not merely a want, it is a need, a thing as necessary as air. But unlike the avoidant, who recoils from too much closeness, the anxious craves it to a fault. They seek reassurance. They overanalyze every word, every pause, every change in tone. They give and give and give until they are depleted, until they have nothing left, and still they wonder if it will ever be enough. And oh, how desperately they chase certainty. They hold on to love as if it were slipping sand, believing that if they just try harder, love will not leave them. They compromise beyond reason. They excuse behaviors that should never be excused. They abandon their own needs for the sake of preserving the relationship, believing that their love, if given freely enough, will heal the wounds of their partner. But love, real love, is not a thing to be won. It is not a battle, nor a performance. It is not something to be convinced or coerced. It must be freely given or not at all. And yet the anxious partner cannot help themselves. Their fear of abandonment looms too large, and in that fear they become what they most dread, too much. Their need, their clinginess, their desperation for validation, it all becomes suffocating. And in an ironic twist of fate, they push their partner away, creating the very distance they feared. And so the cycle begins anew. Now what happens, dear listener, when the avoidant and the anxious find one another? A tragedy, wrapped in romance. At first, the chemistry is undeniable. The anxious, drawn to the mystery of the avoidant, mistakes their distance for depth. The avoidant, flattered by the intensity of the anxious, enjoys the affection, until, of course, it becomes overwhelming. The anxious clings, the avoidant retreats. The anxious panics, the avoidant withdraws further. The anxious demands more, the avoidant shuts down completely. It is a perfect storm, a relationship doomed to oscillate between closeness and distance, longing and fear, and yet neither one can walk away, for each sees in the other a reflection of their deepest wounds. And that, my dear listener, is how love is slowly, painfully destroyed. But must it always be this way? Must love be a battlefield of attachment wounds, a never-ending tug-of-war between fear and desire? No. No, there is a way forward, but it requires something that many are unwilling to do. It requires awareness. It requires that the avoidant stop running long enough to see that love is not a prison, that needing someone does not make them weak, that vulnerability is not a curse, but a gift. It requires that the anxious learn to stand on their own, to love without grasping, to understand that true intimacy cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. It requires that both partners see the cycle for what it is, a loop that will only end when one of them steps off the wheel. And so, the choice remains: continue as you are, or break free. The avoidant can choose to lean in rather than escape. The anxious can choose to let go rather than hold on too tightly. And in doing so, love, real love, healthy love, can finally begin. So tell me, dear listener, which one are you? Are you the runner or the chaser? Are you the one who fears intimacy or the one who clings to it for dear life? And more importantly, now that you know, what will you do with this knowledge? Because love is not about winning or losing. It is not about proving or pleading. It is about meeting in the middle. And if you cannot, if your partner will not, then perhaps, just perhaps, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. And that, my dear listener, is the moment you will finally be free.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.